you're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landis. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. This is episode 66, Breaking the Generational Diet Cycle, which this is important. This is a very personal episode for me and probably will be for many of you as well. Before we get into the content, I want to welcome everybody back if you're a repeat listener and part of my community already. And if you're new here, hello, I'm Maggie Landis. I'm a physician and public health nutritionist, but really what I do is disrupt diet culture, particularly in the realm of weight stigma in the health professions. And I now am essentially all but left my clinical practice to really pursue a career as a health at every size educator, an advocate of intuitive eating, and a consultant for people and professionals specifically that want to change this narrative based on evidence, because that's what I do, based on evidence. I am a scientist to the nth degree and am only convinced by compelling evidence. And in my opinion, there is more than enough evidence for us to really take the weight care out of healthcare. But that's a whole other story. So today we're talking about the generational diet cycle. And what I'm referring to when I say that is this idea that we watched our parents and specifically our mothers diet. They had watched their mothers before them diet. So we end up dieting, micromanaging our bodies, really being overly attentive to our size and what we eat. And we are unfortunately willing that onto our children. So I'm a mother. Many of you are probably mothers, but I'm really framing this episode for anybody who interacts with children. So if you're not a mom, maybe you're a teacher or an aunt or a grandparent or a sports coach for kids or a leader in your church youth organization, or maybe even you work in a job in a retail environment where there are children. Anybody who interacts with a child needs to understand the impact our diet culture participation has on them, because it is significant. So I myself, just if you're unfamiliar with my own personal story, I have 2 kids, and knowing what I know now, of course, it would be to their benefit for my kids not to end up in a situation like I was in, dieting, kind of, this not accepting of my own body and these like long-lasting, decades-long body image struggles and confusion about eating and nutrition. It would really be better if our kids didn't get in that situation in the first place. You've probably heard the phrase, prevention is the best medicine. And generally speaking, I'm not sure I really like that as like a universal tagline, because it really is kind of steeped with privilege and disregard for any sort of social access to prevention. I'm doing air quotes. But in terms of this topic, breaking diet culture, breaking the generational diet cycle for our kids, I think it's true. I think prevention is the best medicine for this. So keep listening. If you are a person who interacts with humans under the age of 18, whether or not you are a parent, this is going to be important for you. I want to, real quick, before we start today's topic, give you a reminder. if you're listening to this podcast and becoming more and more interested in hearing about this entire non-diet universe, this entire health at every size movement that is out there, I encourage you to check out the Undiet Your Mind app. This is a mobile app. It's on iPhone and Android. I did not create it, but it was created by the Body Love Society and has 90 plus, like getting up close to 100 non-diet professionals on this app. I'm one of them. There's also 89 or more others. Lots and lots and lots of different specialties. Some are psychologists, some are body image coaches, some are fitness professionals, some are intuitive eating counselors, doctors, physical therapists, naturopaths, all kinds of people. And this content is available with there's new content released every single week. Mostly audio content, although they are starting to dabble with some writing, some articles, and some videos that are for movement practices. And there's a community board, like a, kind of Facebook-ish group, but not Facebook. Super low price. This is a paid app, but the subscription is like $10 a month. Something ridiculous, like low. And you can get a discount on your first month if you use a code from one of the professionals. Anyhow, I just wanted to throw that out there. If you are wanting more sources for learning, you want to see more and more voices of different professionals with different backgrounds so that, you feel a little bit less crazy thinking that there's this whole underworld out there. It's really something very widely accepted because this is what the evidence supports. But anyhow, find me on Instagram. It's in my link in bio, or you can DM me the word app, just APP. That's it. Don't put emojis and stuff, and you'll get a auto response that has the details to sign up. So let's get into today's topic. All right. How are we going to keep our kids out of this diet culture mess that we are all in? We have a really uphill battle, honestly. They have more access to advertising than we did, because they have smartphones with social media that is basically an advertising tool in their pocket that they are accessing hours and hours and hours a day. The other thing too is their peer group, by nature of this internet, is the whole world. So they're seeing and being modeled and, sort of changed by a much bigger, audience, a much bigger set of input than we were, because, we did watch TV and read magazines, but, there's only so much you could really see in that. There wasn't as much of a kind of comparison, I don't feel like, because that was separate. Like the stuff on TV was clearly TV. There was no expectation that I needed to act or be like a TV star. But I think the lines are a lot blurrier now because, they see other people, young people, YouTubers and these influencers that are really kind of bumping up against the boundary of where they see themselves. And, of course, there's all this manipulation of what they're seeing. We know the internet and the pictures on Instagram and the YouTube videos and stuff are not real, but there's so much technology to completely distort what we're seeing in terms of, sort of the human form and the human appearance. But they don't have the mature brains to recognize that. And so we're up against a behemoth-sized problem. And on this specific podcast episode, I'm not even going to get into the real weeds talking about the eating disorder crisis, because that is so massive and so serious. I've planned a whole other episode that's coming up in a few weeks just specifically to talk about that. But even shy of eating disorders, which in my opinion is sort of the worst possible outcome, don't we just wish our kids spent less time trying to body check themselves, and less time micromanaging their appearance and micromanaging their diet to change their appearance, and less of their lives being distracted by this cultural narrative about eating and body management and body diversity being, sort of like squashed. I mean, I will tell you, I consider myself, this probably sounds a little bit arrogant, but I mean, I consider myself a very intelligent person who probably has always my entire life had an above average interest in food and nutrition and the human body, which is why I've gone to medical school and graduate school and studied these things as a career, because I've always loved them. But I'll tell you what, even with that background, I've still spent a great deal of my adult life being confused about nutrition and food and what should I be eating. And so I know if I have this structured of a background and a baseline understanding of the science that, and I'm being swayed by the culture, but the point of that is to say that anybody who's got less of a kind of foundation of evidence is going to be so, moved and challenged and confronted by this diet culture, because it affects every single touch point. And, when that is the environment, and you take children and teenagers with developmentally immature brains and you give them iPhones and put them in their pockets, the outcome of that is not always good. So I'm going to tell you, this is a little story here about my own children. And this is where it gets kind of personal, even in a recent encounter. But I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. My 14-year-old daughter is starting high school in the fall, in a few months, and she does competitive dance, has been doing dance for 10 years, is on a, sort of traveling competitive dance team. And so if you don't think that having a teenage daughter doing dance, starting high school, makes me not think about diet culture and disordered eating and body image problems, I think about this all the time. So, the fact that you may be worried about these things with your kids is normal. And even when you are able to leave diet culture and feel like you have a very firm footing in the non-diet space, it is normal to still have these concerns about your kids, because they are in, like I said, this environment that we can't, control absolutely. Now, the good news is the dance studio my daughter goes to is a very body diverse, sort of body neutral group. There are performers in all levels of performing groups that are a variety of sizes and shapes, which I think is great. And I think it's great for those kids in, sort of non-conforming bodies. But I also think that, it's good for everybody. I would be amiss to think that because they just have, dance partners of different sizes means that there's no risk for really bad body image issues and body dissatisfaction in all of the people. I mean, teenage girls, they're teenage girls, right? And particularly when kids are involved in athletics or sports or activities that are aesthetic in nature, like dance, gymnastics, cheerleading, diving, figure skating, or they're in sports that are weight classed, like wrestling is the one that comes to mind. I think maybe rowing. I don't know. I'm like in landlocked USA, so we don't have rowing here, but I think rowing, you have to weigh a certain amount to row. But all that, when it's the body size is like built into the competition of these sports, that message is like amplified a millionfold. So, in terms of my own daughter, I mean, I'm constantly thinking about this. I'm constantly mindful of the language I use around food and eating and exercise and fitness. And I'll go through some of those specific tips I have in a minute. But here is the part of the story you would never guess. All right. It's actually sort of interesting that I scheduled to talk about this topic right now because I planned this way in advance. But as I'm recording this, literally a week ago, my 11-year-old son, who is in 5th grade, does not have an iPhone, does not participate in any sort of aesthetic sport or weight-classed sport. He honestly, I mean, from my perspective, doesn't even have really strong feelings about his appearance. And I say that based on like his like mismatched clothes and uncombed hair, and he kind of like doesn't care. I mean, he doesn't like, he's just sort of not into that stuff yet. I found him sitting at our family computer in the kitchen the other day, Googling what is the normal size for an 11-year-old boy. And I saw that and my like heart dropped because he is honestly the last child on my radar screen to have body image issues. You know, and here he is basically Googling, trying to figure out if his body is, quote, normal or not. So, you know, I knew I needed to respond to this, but it's one of those moments in parenting where, like, you want to be inquisitive, but you don't want to be too, like, accusatory, and you want to be interested, but you don't want to be, like, overly interested or controlling, and you want to be, you know, able to uplift your child and be positive, but you also need to be realistic. And it's just, I wasn't sure. I mean, I had to like react, right? So the first thing I just said to him was, why are you concerned about the size of your body? Like, what made you want to Google this answer? And I was furious because, as it turns out, this whole thing was tipped off by this dumb thing they do at school called the fitnessgram. From what I can tell, I don't remember my daughter ever talking about this, but I'm sure she had it in her elementary school several years ago. But this is like, sounds like the updated, you know, version of that presidential physical fitness test that I did in the 80s. I actually cannot believe this is even still a thing. And I didn't know it was still a thing. So I'm kind of horrified that this is going on and I didn't even know this. But they weigh the kids as part of this assessment. And so essentially the school system is inviting this fatphobic diet culture, you know, into their school, into their PE class, and presenting it to kids as young as 5 years old. So, I mean, I'm like just beyond about this, but essentially, I didn't want to let my emotions, you know, get crazy in front of my son because I want him to feel like he can ask me questions and stuff. And if I like fly off the handle and act like a fool, then of course that really shuts down the lines of communication. But he described to me, here's the deal. So basically this fitnessgram test, they have to do a height and a weight. Who knows why, but of course, none of the kids are talking about who's taller and shorter because you don't really have to talk about who's taller and shorter. It's like obvious who's taller and shorter. And nobody really even seems to care, honestly, because we know the short kids are usually short because they have short parents. And we all know that. And we see their parents and we just sort of say, okay, that kid's tall. He has tall parents. That kid's short. He's got short parents. Like, it's just not, I don't know. I just don't think it's a point of conversation that often. But the weight talk is like big. So they weigh all these kids, and I guess they don't weigh them in front of each other, thank God, but they weigh them, and then because kids are kids, then they all want to talk about how much they weigh to each other, like, hey, I weighed this, do you weigh this? And you really can't avoid that if you're a child in that situation, because your choices are either to discuss your weight or say that you don't want to discuss your weight, which then invites a series of comments like, Why won't you tell me? Are you afraid that we'll think you're fat? Or, all this kind of stuff. So my son, who is a like peacekeeper, like really just non-confrontational, sweet kid, packs all that up in his mind, comes home and is sitting at my computer Googling what is the normal size of an 11-year-old. And guess what happens? So then when you ask that question on Google, you end up, the first couple hits are some goofy Quora board or whatever, talking about the normal size and blah, blah, blah. I won't even say it, but there's a pounds that are listed here. And I know that is just a commentary from the 50th percentile of the CDC growth chart. All right. But my son doesn't know that. He sees that the normal size of an 11-year-old is blank. And he's bigger than that. He's quite a bit bigger than that. My son's weight, usually has tracked on the growth curve, like on the 90 to 95th percentile for his age, his whole entire life. But guess what? His height is like on the 98th percentile. I have big, tall children, which is just shouldn't be like a big surprise if you've met their dad and I. But anyway, I know how normal he is. But he's sitting here on this computer doubting his own body, getting some answer that is totally out of context with no explanation. And all he knows, had I not walked up behind him while he was using the computer and seen what he was doing, that his body is not, quote, normal. And who knows where that would have led. So, that the point of all of that story is that we have to know that this is out there affecting all the kids. And it's not only the teenage girls doing dance class. It is the 11-year-old boys going to school with uncombed hair in their regular old PE class. So we have a responsibility to break this cycle of, body shaming, dieting, body checking for our kids, our own kids and the kids around us. And I've got 5 tips, okay? 5 top tips. Some of them are, immediately in our control. Some of them are probably a higher order away in terms of changing things. But here's a few that I want to go through just in this conversation today. So the first thing is we've got to stop doing this in school. I mean, like, for Pete's sake. I thought we had stopped doing this. Apparently we have not stopped doing this. That I remember that presidential physical fitness test was like a mortifying experience. And I wasn't a heavy child, but I was a child who could not do more than 1 pull-up on the freaking chin-up bar and could barely, pass the slowest kid in class running laps. So there's no reason to bring weight up in school. There's just none. I'm sure that the reason they do it is because they probably calculate the BMI. But the BMI is bogus. We know that. I've talked about that ad nauseum. Frankly, the kids need to be weighed intermittently at their pediatrician. I don't even think they need to be weighed at every visit at the pediatrician's office. But, 100% for sure, they do not need to be getting weighed at school. And I don't know how to address this. If some of you guys are like PE teachers or health educators or like school administrators or something, we've got to start talking about this because this is a big problem. Okay, number 2. We as the adults around kids need to stop our body talking and our really stigmatizing language around eating. So no more, quote, does this outfit make me look fat? Or I'm going to be bad and have ice cream. Or we can't buy that because that's junk food. Or you're only allowed to have a healthy snack. Or I want to eat a healthy lunch or whatever. Like this bad for you, good for you, shouldn't, can't, not allowed stuff just can't be part of our like vernacular. And if you think your language is neutral, it's probably not because it takes a lot of iterations of rephrasing things to really truly have it be neutral without any even flavor of judgment or morality creeping in. So it's really important. And even if you're not saying it to your kids, you're saying it to your partner, or you're on the phone with a girlfriend or whatever, you can't talk like that and expect our kids to have any other belief system other than restriction and diet culture. So we got to do better. And here's the other thing. Number 3, no more dieting like right in front of our kids. Even if you don't talk about it, or if you talk about things in a neutral way, which is probably doubtful because listen, dieters talk about what they're doing. Let's just be honest. That's one of the best parts about dieting is you get to tell everybody about what you're doing. Kids are really observant. They see mom, eating different food than the rest of the family. They see adults getting hungry and hangry and not listening to their body when it's very clear that they need to be eating. They see us, muttering under our breath, being frustrated when we have to clean out our closet for the too small clothes pile that, I'm, quote, too fat to wear now, and that sort of stuff. They see the world through our experiences, even if there's no language involved. And frankly, they're going to have enough hard experiences like we talked about. They are confronted with this stuff from every direction, every minute. They don't need the burden of ours. And so to the degree that we can, we really have a responsibility to protect them insofar as our interactions around them. Number 4, we need to start this narrative or habit or lifestyle of adding, and not this philosophy of having to restrict and control everything. Now, this will work for us too, and it is one of the really fundamental parts of intuitive eating is looking at things with a level of open-mindedness and curiosity. But this really works well with kids. This really will give them, sort of a lens to look through so that diet culture doesn't become the default version of the world. Kids are more curious and more open-minded and more interested often to try new things and diversify their choices. And so we need to help them do that. And that includes adding, like I said, new foods, different foods, culturally appropriate foods. That involves adding physical activity, adding emotional self-care, and this level of self-awareness is part of what we are teaching them to do, that their bodies work, their bodies are not broken, and if they learn to rely on their bodies, they can trust that. I've talked a lot about restricting and how that doesn't work. It doesn't work for anything because it's a very self-defeating perspective. The body and the mind become laser focused on whatever's being restricted, and it always backfires and leads to doing more of the thing, not less of the thing. In fact, that's how this diet binge cycle works, is that the more you diet, the more you will overeat and binge, which then results in you wanting to diet and restrict more, which leads to more. It's just a sort of feedback loop. But in terms of the kids, we really should not be so restrictive and not talk about food and food choices in a restrictive way. We really need to capitalize on their curiosity and this idea of adding. Get them in the kitchen, all right? Let them help you grocery shop and meal prep and pick recipes and literally get their hands dirty with food. And, does that mean that they're going to eat it all? No, it does not mean that they're going to eat it all. It doesn't mean your husband's going to eat it all either. But if you at least have some level of exposure and familiarity with the idea that there's more choices than they believe there is, will help. And it really will give them a level of trust in their own curiosity as things come up over time. Because that's really what this is. This intuitive eating, intuitive movement is about being curious enough about yourself to try something. That's really all it's saying. So the kids are in a great position to do that as long as we don't screw it up, basically, which is essentially that's parenting 101 from a veteran pediatrician and mother. Is like, they'll be fine as long as we don't screw it up, right? Okay. And here's the fifth thing I'm going to mention, and then I don't want this to get too long out of hand because I could talk about this for a long time. We need to really have conversations with our kids about this idea that the media isn't reality. Okay, and that the normal, quote, average images they're seeing on the internet and on the social media are literally computer augmented reality. Now, every family has their own boundaries with technology and phones and internet and stuff with different age kids. And that's not really my wheelhouse to tell you what's better or worse there. I will tell you, I don't believe in a complete abstention from the outside world for kids that are age ready and maturity ready to interact with that, because just like we talked about a minute ago, anything that you restrict absolutely is a very short-term solution. And eventually, when there is access, which they will find access before you think they will find access, they have no point of reference for navigating that. It's really overwhelming and disorienting, and they have no sort of guidance. So I do think it's okay for kids to see what is in the world. But I do think that requires supervision, that requires, in regard to this whole body image stuff and diet culture stuff, lots of conversations and an awareness of what they're seeing and what they think about what they see. So ask them what sort of personalities and YouTubers they follow, and let them show you what they look like. Ask them, what they think about the way that they look, the celebrity people, just to have a conversation and approach this in the least judgmental way possible, because you want to keep the lines of communication open, because this has to be we have to be setting this up for an ongoing, conversation, and having access to that line of communication with your kids is the only way you will have any influence in their life. So be really proactive in maintaining access to what they're doing. And if you approach what they're doing online or with their phones or on the internet or with their friends, whatever, from a place of curiosity and non-judgment and non-assuming, the chance of them continuing to be open with you and invite you to participate is going to be much higher. So it's hard to do. And I won't call myself a parenting expert, but I've gathered a few things in my years of pediatrics and my years as a mother about, how the mind of children works. But, I hope that this has been some ideas for how you can help break this generational diet cycle with kids, your kids or the kids around you. I also want to say very clearly that if you have a child with body image concerns, body dissatisfaction, disordered eating, or even an eating disorder, it's not your fault. All right. And you feeling guilty and responsible is not going to get them the treatment they need any faster. So know that these issues are extremely common. In fact, like I said, I'm going to do an episode in a few weeks about this eating disorder epidemic in kids because it is that critical that I'm doing a whole episode. So subscribe to my podcast and you won't miss it when it comes up because I can't remember off the top of my head what week it is. But, I do want you to know you're not alone. This will pop up in places where you least expect, including my 11-year-old son who doesn't comb his hair. I recommend that you talk to your family doctor, your pediatricians about concerns you have. Get a counselor involved if that's necessary. And if you really need to, call a crisis line like the NEDA Crisis Line, National Eating Disorder Association. They have a text, a call, a website. They have a lot of ways to contact them if you need help, either for yourself or for a child that you care about. All right. So, last reminder before we sign off that you want to be on my community list as a health professional, if you are in fact a health professional. Because I have got some projects in the works. One very specific project I don't want to name just yet is going to be released at the end of March. And the way you're going to be first to know is that I know you're a health professional and you are in my world. So the best place is to go to the Instagram link in bio or to my website, maggielandismd.com. I have got an entire page describing some free resources I have for other health professionals, and I want to know that you're there, and know that I'm here to help you, and you want to know that you're going to be first to hear about my upcoming projects. So I look forward to continuing this conversation with you, however you want to connect with me, and we will talk to you next Wednesday. Thanks for joining. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at MaggieLandisMD and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at MaggieLandisMD.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.